I practice BDSM myself as a sub under a dom. There is a certain perception that your sexuality should sort of like die when you become a mother. Once you have a child and you're a mother, then you become a Madonna. You're supposed to be faultless, you're supposed to be perfect and all those things. And that's a huge responsibility, I think.
And I remember one time going to church, and a lady came and told me that I'm not dressed appropriately for Jesus, or I don't know, for who. That policing it's just like unnecessary, right? And it brings us back to that pretentiousness of parenthood where you're only supposed to dress and look a certain way as a mom. Are you mad? I want to look sexy for the rest of my life.
Motherhood and being a dom. Well, my daughter, who is 23, knows what I do. So it's been interesting to share that part of my life with her without quite sharing it.
To express myself even to my son, there's things, and I've told him, there are times when someone will try to embarrass you because of something they've seen about your mom, you know? Something small like, you know, your mom posts pictures in bikinis when she's at the beach, yeah? I was like, Kwanzaa, aren't those pictures nice? I look amazing, you know, in those pics. So what is their issue? Their problem is that their mom can't pose like that, which is not, it's fine. That's how their mom is. But me, this is how I am, right? And the more I am like that with my son, the more comfortable he is expressing. I'm telling you, my son tells me things like we are friends, and I love it because I didn't have that growing up, you know?
I tell women that they need to know for themselves what they want sexually, even after motherhood, because motherhood changes a lot of things about you, your priorities, your body, you know, the way you perceive yourself as a sexual person. So I tell mothers that we can actually come and have that conversation because I have had certain shifts in my life, and I'm still a mother, and I have been able to express certain aspects of my sexuality in ways that have been fairly unconventional, especially for this society.
I don't see sexuality or sensuality negatively. I push it, I promote it. I feel like women should feel, you know, sexy and be very sensual. That's how we are created. I feel like that's why we are here. You know, we are attractive little flowers. So
there is nothing wrong with kink and fetish. If this is something that you actually feel like you want to do, liberate yourself.
Good morning, everyone. How are you? No one or nothing prepares a young person for how transformative mothering or becoming a mother or being a mother is, and most especially physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually. And while a mother is in this place where everything is new and there's no information, or if the information is there, she finds that she's heavily policed, especially regarding her sexuality, which until this point was hers. And suddenly, it's everyone's. People want to police you in regards to your sexuality, how you have sex, who you have sex with, why you being sexy and you're a mother. So many things come up, and that's what we're going to discuss today from a policy and from a lived experiences point of view in two panel discussions. But before we do, let me introduce Amina Jasho, who is the founder of UnMothering the Woman, and she'll give us an idea and a grounding of what today is about. Amina?
Thank you, Wambui. Is this microphone working? Can you hear me? Okay. So, thank you for the introduction. I think now this has become a thing. Let's exchange because I don't feel like I can hear myself. Can you hear me now? Perfect. Yeah, so these introductions are now becoming a thing. Thank you again for joining us. We call this not a safe space, but a brave space. I'm not going to do the speech that I've now done twice. Do it again. You want me to do it again? Oh, you okay. Not everyone has had the speech. Okay, let me look for it. Gosh. So in 2020, my dream was to work on a documentary that would highlight the challenges that women face in maternal health care in this country. But then COVID-19 happened, and then we had to pivot to digital storytelling. But I'm so glad that happened because we are now creating a movement. We are now part of something bigger than I imagined or even envisioned. This gendered view of identity, this idea that society can dictate what a mother should be and what a mother can and can't do, is what we are fighting for. For the last 2 years, UnMothering the Woman has been fighting for just that. UnMothering the Woman is not about raising awareness, is not only raising awareness about taboo topics that have been relegated to women's gatherings, it's about choice. It's about separating motherhood from our female identity. We are more than mothers. We are also women. It's time to take back our power. Today, we are not only here to celebrate each other, we are here to celebrate choice. We are here to celebrate the fact that we have voices that are sometimes silenced. And at the very least, we are listening to each other. To celebrate the fact that we have voices that are sometimes silenced, that are now filtering through this noise. At the very least, we are listening to each other. Lastly, we are here to celebrate this safe space and the community we have created as UnMothering the Woman. I want to thank you all, the women and the men who have been a part of us. I want to thank you for your courage. I want to thank you for trusting us with your stories. I want to thank you for being you and for being here with us. I welcome you today into our brave space by reading that poem. Do you want me to read it again?
Point for today.
We have another poem for today. So if you'll allow me to read that one instead of that brave space poem that I always read, which ones would you prefer? Both. Okay, guys.
Guys, we
Okay.
have time. We have like things to, no? Okay, we are here. Since we are here.
Okay.
So.
Let me read for you the brave space poem because I think it's very important. So, together we will create a brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We carry scars, and we all have caused wounds. But in this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and more love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together. And we will work on it side by side. Okay, now let me read for you what I wanted to read for you today.
I can actually read it if oh, you're okay.
No, I'm okay.
You've read a lot today.
This is what I wanted to read for you today because I felt like it was so important as women who are holders of truth, who are holders of homes, who are holders of sexuality, who are holders of wombs, who are holders of vaginas. We need to take back our power. We need to own ourselves. So I think Wamboy sent this to me earlier in the week, earlier in the month. And I thought, this is for you woman, for you holder of the home, for you holder of everything, matriarch. This duty feels heavy to hold some days. So I often feel like I don't know what I'm doing. How does the world expect us to hold it all together when in many moments we feel like we're falling apart? In motherhood, I am learning as I go. I am raising 3 daughters, and I don't believe that it's by accident. There's so much to unlearn, so much to dismantle and reset. There's so much to sort through, make peace with, and do differently. There's so much to give thanks for. As I mother my children, I realize that I must also mother myself. As I love my children, I realize how much work I still need to do when it comes to loving myself. When I cradle my children, I understand the importance of leading by example so that they not only feel the softness of their mother, but see it. I am their mirror. Healing to me means letting people see us in our truest form. I am a work in progress. I am healing for generations to come. I am who my grandmother prayed me to be. I am a matriarch. Thank you.
Sawa,
Am
thank
I
you.
done? Can I
Yeah,
go sit
yeah,
down?
you can sit down. And she deserves a big
Thank
round
you.
of applause. Hey, applause. Applause. Sawa sawa. So I'm going to invite Maureen Odera to come to stage and let us know what we're doing next. That poem was by Alex L. If you don't follow her on Instagram, I don't know why you have Instagram. Or why you have Instagram if you don't follow her. She's very beautiful. She has, I think we've watched her journey. She has an older daughter. I think now she's 13. Okay, I'm sorry. Just that was what she had shared with us, and got her other two daughters much later. So we've watched her Instagram be about the journey of her mothering her first daughter, mothering herself. I think she found love again. But why do I feel like that's the partner is still the dad of the first child? I'm very confused. No. Okay.
No.
Alex L. Alex ELLE. So Alex underscore ELLE. So she finds love again. She gets pregnant. Then she gets pregnant again. And it's a roller coaster basically.
And in between there, she's published
A
three
book,
books.
3 books.
Three
Yeah.
books. Her
And
last
she's
book is
done
called Rain, and I think it's a self-love affirmation book. I think from her two publications, that's the one that resonated the most, at least for me.
Okay.
Because she had come into her own. She was very secure in who she was as a person. And it really reflects in her relationships. It reflects in how she parents. And she talked about this internal struggle when she was writing the book, where she was not sure how much time she was dedicating to her children, because I think she was pregnant with her third child at that time while she was in the process of writing Rain.
and she was running workshops around America to help other women heal.
So she was torn between sticking to, because she felt a really strong inclination to keep writing, but at the same time, it was taking away from the joy of being with her family, who she loved. And it took her talking to her partner, who I think is now her husband, to realize that, and I like what he told her in terms of, we are fine. Like, you've talked about this book for a while now. Like, you sleep, live, dream, think. It's all you do. And I like the way she does affirmations in the clear sticky notes. She was leaving them all over the house. And her husband is like, just get to the writing, sit down and write. The baby is in your womb, but they're still growing. They're fine. They don't need you right now. And yeah, basically he's telling her, I've got you covered. You go and write your book. And I feel like you can feel her in, like, if you haven't already, please add Rain by Alex L to your reading list. It's worth the read.
Then we invoice her for marketing.
For marketing?
Yeah, I feel like, we'll just write her an email, shoot her an email.
But this is recorded, right? So we can send the clip and go like, yo,
yes,
royalty checks.
Just
okay.
Kidogo cash our way. Sawa, over to you.
Hi, everyone. And for those joining us online, welcome. My name is Maureen. Born, bred, Nairobi, Kenyan, your typical Kenyan girl with the ups and downs in between there. I still call myself a girl despite my age because my inner child keeps me alive. She's happy, she's full of life, and the day she dies, I feel like my spirit will die. So every day, I work hard to keep her alive. We'll be having our first session discussing regulation around sexuality and what that regulation means. So we're looking at laws, we're looking at policies, we're looking at legislation, we're looking at social, cultural norms and beliefs that fit us into this puzzle pieces that need to fit perfectly and forget that we are all individuals at the end of the day. I'm going to be joined by amazing people on stage. I think one person was on the way, if Kibali can just confirm that they're here. But in the interest of time, we're going to begin. So I don't like this thing of, I want to introduce someone and then I say their name and I'm like, we've taken away the opportunity for them to introduce themselves. I know we had spoken earlier before the program began. So if you know we had a conversation earlier, I'm going to invite you to join me on stage and we can begin. Let's give them a round of applause as they make their way to the stage. A bit louder. No, there's no order. Wherever you feel comfortable. Thank you once again for honoring us with your presence. Please feel free, feel at home. We promise we don't bite unless you ask and consent is given. unless it's love bites. Yeah, but you gotta ask. You gotta seek consent first. So if you ask and consent is given, sawa tutakuuma tu. I'll allow you to introduce yourself first because you're seated closer to me.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rachel Mwekali. I am a Pan-African feminist, a community organizer, a woman human rights defender, and I convene a social movement called Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defenders Kenya. I'm born and bred in Mathare and living in Mathare. But also I believe in the politics of intersectionality. And that's why I'm also here. And I'm happy you all amazing women and the team for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikali.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Caroline Joroge. I prefer being called Esther. That is my street name. I'm an active female sex worker and a sex workers' rights activist, born and bred in Nairobi at Kirinyaga Road. And I am a very passionate advocate for women's rights and HIV prevention.
Thank you so much, Caro.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Florence. I am a clinical psychologist and also a medical doctor, currently working in the area of HIV and sexual violence management. I loved the conversation we were having earlier about education, about sex. And as part of my training in both fields, there is technical education about sex. However, this information does not trickle down. Neither does it seem to have the desired effect, or rather a positive impact on our actual lives. And because of that, I have developed an interest in educating about sex, however I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And I think that's going to be our starting point, where you've talked about learning or being educated about sex. And I think in one of our earlier sessions where Wamboi was asking the audience, what does it mean, or how did you learn about sex? Have you been taught about it? And a majority of us have had very varied experience in terms of sex. As my friend Wamboi had said, we have an internal question of, not even a question, it's a commentary. It's an internal running commentary that you learn on the job, that you find yourself in a situation where you're going to engage in sex or have some kind of sexual act for the first time, and you're fumbling because you are literally learning on the job. And from your perspective as a clinical psychologist, where do you think our rooting in sex and sexuality comes from? Is it learned human behavior? Is it inherent in us? Are we born with it? Is it genetics? What would you say drives our need as human beings to be sexual, and where does that drive come from? But what informs it as well, and from a perspective of education?
Thank you, Maureen. So the sex drive is inherent. It's one of our core, it's part of our id. That's the psychological construct, like the need to eat, the need to, so it's inherent, and your body is wired for sex. And most of what happens is generated in the brain. There's a whole field of study regarding what it is that drives the sex drive, and even the whole sexual response cycle. So there's something called a sexual response cycle that starts in the brain, and then it cascades to your hormones, to your physical organs. So that's the biology of it. So you're born as a sexual being. okay? What shapes how we behave? So there's the genetics, there's the biology, there's the need for sex. However, there is what you hear from the home where you grew up, from the society around you, what you're taught in class, what you learn on other fora. And the unfortunate thing is that for most of us, sex education is by accident or by, as you said, on the job, okay? So we have we have an innate drive that all of us have that is key to sustaining of the species because you need it for reproduction. However, we actually do not put energy, time. We don't have a focus on learning about it, which I think is a big fault in our entire system. So why do you go to school and learn about the history of civilization in Europe? Or, very many things that may have no direct impact on your life, yet there's no dedicated time and space for you to learn about sex. Yet it has such a huge impact on our lives. How you have sex, who you have sex with, has a great impact on your everyday life. Mm-hmm. Your experience in it may impact your mind, it may impact your health. I work in a HIV clinic. We say it's an STI clinic because in Kenya, 93% of people got HIV from heterosexual contact. So 1.5 million people in this country are living with a disease that they acquired through sex. So it's vitally important, yet it doesn't get as much airtime as it needs. So what happens is that you either learn it from your friend, whispered conversations, or now we have the internet. So the kids nowadays, that's where they get the information from. For the earlier generation, it was mainly whispered conversations. And then thank God for the generation that had bridal showers, because at least then you got some information. But the vast majority, it was on the job, quote unquote. And a lot of the sexual information out there, again, is skewed. There's an assumption that you know the basics. So we are moving to complicated things. Yet at the baseline, that information is not provided.
I'm glad you've said that there's an assumption we know the basics, because if I look back to my learning or sexual experiences was through the biology textbook, which was very medical inclined. It's a transverse section. And I remember an incident looking at myself later on in adulthood, like I think I was 19 or 20. So in my head, the biology book is sectional, but I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I'm like, where's my vulva? Like, that disconnect between what I'm seeing and what was in the textbook. And I'm curious to know from Carol and Mwikali, where for us, or let me speak for myself, sex was taught as a subject, biology, and even later on in life, it was a conversation around procreation, not so much about pleasure, not so much about exploration, not so much, again, inherent ability as human beings to desire sex or feel desired. And I'm curious to know from Caro and Mwikali, in terms of your learnings, even in the spaces that you occupy, when we look at how we are made to perceive sexuality and sex in a certain way. So going back still on the topic of education, but also the regulation of the learning in terms of the do's and the don'ts, and trying to tie it back to the real experiences of sex vis-a-vis the very logical conversations we have around sex.
Well, thank you very much, Maureen. Now, beginning from the basics, that like we have the separation of the populations that are most marginalized and at risks, where due to lack of legislations in our country, nobody cares whether you have feelings or not. whether you need to understand that you have a right to make a choice on when to have sex and not to have sex, or how you're going to feel the pleasure, because whatever you are engaged in as per the law, quotes in quotes, is illegal. So that becomes a great barrier. And when I was that young and naive at the age of 14, engaging in sex work, I came from a point of ignorance, not knowing I can choose to have this client and make a negotiation on the table saying that I want us to have the sex like this. But at that time, I did not have that power, because at the same time, I did not have the information. At the same time, nobody was there to protect me, the vulnerability that I was exposed to. So I just moved in, get me the money, we have sex however you want it. Anything that comes my way, that is okay with me. So that is where, as the criminalized population, we come in when it comes to sex, which is very risky to most of the young girls who engage in sex work, and also to the mature people also in the sex work. The bargaining powers, the powers to make decisions are not for you. You have no any power to make a decision. At the end of the day, you're just a sex worker. So you're there for money. So what next?
Okay. I like the last point you've raised, and I think it'll come back as a question, even as we give Mikali an opportunity to speak. And maybe you could just think on it, where we are looking at who holds the power. There's a power dynamics in that situation between you and the client. But then when there's the different power dynamics and you're in a very unsafe situation and you go to report a crime or an assault that has been committed. And I ask this because the commercial sex work space has a lot of nuances and innuendos where there's a lot of gray areas in terms of legislature. You've talked about criminalization, but then when we look at your protection in the space vis-a-vis the criminalization conversation, and we're looking at regulations here. How do we bridge that gap between your safety and what the law says? So I think we'll hold off on that question as Mukali, I guess, has a chance to say something as well.
Thank you so much. Allow me to be as authentic, as practical as I can. Is that okay, ladies in the room? Because I think we are too serious. A conversation that should be fun.
No, as long as we are respectful and mindful.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yes.
So I'm saying a conversation that should be fun, because if you look in communities that you're coming, all of us women, women, we are not homogeneous, that's one. Whether you exist as gender transsexual person, as a lesbian, bisexual. The reality is that the politics around sex has been very patriarchal. It has been about satisfying men. And we need to call that out. It has not been about satisfying ourselves as women. And when you're asking this question, it reminds me, like, we ran a very radical campaign in our movement called Pussy Power. I don't know if majority of you have heard about it. And we did a festival last year for 5 days called Pussy Power Festival. And some of the discussion we were discussing was about what we are talking now, about the sex, sexuality, and pleasure. Sex, one, all of us, we are unlearning. You'll see historically or now, sex discussion were discussed, even within our own communities, about a man needs to be satisfied. Unafaa uzungushe sijui kiuno aje. So, you know, those things, not even telling the men pia unafaa ushike mwanamke aje. You know, there are some of the guys, when they touch you, are like, about heterosexual now, yeah? When they touch you, are like, hey, amenishika hiyo, like you've touched my breast as if you're touching an avocado. Should be slowly, yeah? Or a mango. Should be slowly, yeah? In fact, you're not even enjoying. True or false, ladies, eh?
That's true.
You're not enjoying. And this, for me, it's a point that we need to start reclaiming that power. And even within our own movement, as activists and even feminists and women in our own communities, I'm like, one, where I am now is also as Mwikali, I've started also learning how to bargain sex in bed. Because the way we have been brought up, most of the time it has been about the guy and not which style you want, which style you don't want. And especially if you live in informal settlement, it's worse. Because even you can't scream the way you want to scream. There's no dignity in you having the sex you want to have, because there's aluminium apartment and there's a way you want it, but as a woman, you're told you can't do that because you're interfering even in your neighbor's space. So I think it's also one of also this contract. We remove this mentality that sex has to be done in such a way that makes a man have fun and not you have fun. But secondly, coming to critique in terms of also my experience in the movement and personally in my personal journey, the fact being introduced with sex education in school in class 6, yeah, we are being told that, especially if you're a woman, when you start your menses, and as a girl, you're told if you have sex, you'll get pregnant. You'll get pregnant, and you should not play with the boys. But boys are never told you should not play with the girls. True or false? So it's it has been a culture that has been giving guys more power and not ourselves. At the same time, having this mentality that sex is only for procreation, for having kids. Me, I want to have sex when I'm not being worried about having kids, but I want to have sex that I'm enjoying and I'm feeling it's fun. But at the same time, I can ask about that sex consensual. And this comes also to the politics about even, as much as with all the due respect of religion, I usually say it, I do consensual fornication. Yeah, I do consensual fornication. Most of us, we're having sex, like, whichever you believe we respect, but somehow this patriarchal way of the law of the book of the religion, it's the same that gives the men the power, not the women.
Okay.
And that's why you'll see most of us, when you want to talk about our sexuality, you'll feel even shy talking because the society will criminalize you, but you're not married. So what comes also to the mind is also what is moral to you might not be moral to me. What you define marriage is not what I define marriage. What you define partnership is not how I define partnership. And I think living in this community that we live, also it's very cognizant that we appreciate even us all in this room in our own diversity, is that in one or another, the way we're introduced to sex is not the way, if now where we were, would have wanted it to be.
Okay.
It was introduced in such a way you're like, oh my God, if I return to those years, I would prefer this and this way. Mechanically, when I started having sex, being in this abusive relationship as young as 13 years, with this older person, now when I have it, it's out of choice, yeah? I can say, me, I want to be on top. Or me, I want to be on the side. Or my review for you with the scorecards this next time, please improve on this. Yeah? Because most of the time, I think it has been the burden of sex has been put on women. And even now, when you're talking about the key population, about even HIV, and also the sexual transmitted diseases, I agree with choice where also I need to have my own condoms, but also I refuse the point where the burden of sex has to be put on women.
Okay.
Like for me to buy all the time, why not you buy?
There are three things, sorry to interrupt, Mikali, but there are three things I'd like at least to think about as we give our other panelists a chance to introduce themselves. The first thing is, you mentioned, and that struck me, was dignity in sex. I know you've given it in relation to the room that you're in and the space you're in while having sex, where you feel like your sexual freedom is curtailed. You can't be as loud as you want to be because you're in a very confined space with neighbors around you. But when we look at everything you've said following that, in terms of dignity of sex, you've talked about consent, you've talked about access to contraceptives, you've talked about your right to choose when you want to have sex. And those are some of the things that in my head, when I think about regulation of sex, and you've introduced the power dynamic conversation again, where it's put upon us, the burden of your sexual partner's happiness or pleasure is in your hands, especially if you're in a very heterosexual relationship where it's a male-female engagement. It's the burden on the woman to make sure this man has some pleasure. But what about your own pleasure? And it goes back even in how some of our laws around sexuality have been drafted, because it's been written by people who are not necessarily in the frame of mind where we are at. Yeah. So that's something I think we need to explore a bit further, because that dignity in sex, that regulation of our pleasure by the law, by legal entities or religious entities or the patriarchy, in terms of regulating how women enjoy sex, Yeah, so I think that's something we can come and explore further. I know Caro is dying to give us more information on what we had asked, but we're going to allow our other panelists to introduce themselves.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Hi.
First of all, I apologize deeply for being late. Um, I could bring in, a conglomerate of things that contributed, like traffic, caregiving, being a woman and leaving the house. But I am so sorry. First of all, my name is Nafula Wafula. I identify as an Afro-feminist, meaning my feminism is very much informed by my experiences as an African woman. And I am a campaigner, I'm an organizer. I currently work at an organization called change.org, where I manage their training programs within the region. So Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And our focus is on building people power and building civic engagement, particularly focused on marginalized communities and women. So the idea is, how do we bring women's voices to the forefront, and how do we get women to be able to take charge of the change they want to see in their communities and in their own lives by transferring power into their hands. So I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation. I'm so happy that everyone here is just, like girl power goals. And so I'm really, really excited to jump in at a point where the conversation in itself is already, giving me chills. So thank you so much.
I'm glad you're ready to dive in. Please go ahead with your question.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Ikiara, a very mature adult that is supposed supposed to be having sex, but she isn't.
Okay.
Well, my question is, the doctor spoke about trauma, and the moment she said we are wired as children to be sexual beings, my mind was like, wait, so am I human? So with trauma comes the fact that your brain doesn't really know sex. When you're having sex, you're thinking about other things that you shouldn't be. Oh, my partner has big ears. Oh, is that his hair? What's happening? Like, your brain is literally not there. So are there ways? I know you say therapy, and I've tried. It doesn't work for all. Is there a way or programs that wouldn't, talk to women that have gone through abuse and kind of get them to a safer space to understand that it's okay to have sex, it's okay to fail, it's okay to get there? So that's my question, because at the end of the day, I'm not alone. I know there's so many people that stopped having sex, not because they shouldn't or their parents are telling them not to, because they realize that it doesn't suit them anymore. So why am I having sex if it feels nothing to me? It can feel something, only that my brain doesn't let me get there. So is there anything that we can do? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. So the statistics are horrible for women. So there are different types of sexual dysfunction. One of them is lack of interest. Another one is sexual arousal disorder, female sexual arousal disorder, where you may want to, but your brain and body are not cooperating. And unfortunately, up to 40% of women at some point will have no interest, or you may want to, but the body has refused, as you said. And then, so 40%, like that's almost half of us. Then there's another cause of sexual dysfunction, which is pain before, during, or after sex. That unfortunately affects up to 75% of us. Okay. Difficulties with orgasm. You just don't climax. Up to 40% at some point or other for women. So these disorders affect men as well. However, the percentages are much lower, 3%, 2%, but for women, it's significant. And as you mentioned, trauma is one of the reasons. And again, the statistics are horrible. Up to a third of us will be sexually abused at some point or the other. That's rape or defilement. But when it comes to sexual harassment, literally all women have been harassed at some point or the other. So we're literally all living with trauma, which has a great impact on the expression of our sexuality. And then there's a whole host of other factors: low self-esteem, negative body image, relationship issues, there's conflict. You're afraid of getting pregnant. That's a huge one. And it actually, conversely, you find women who are approaching menopause or who are menopausal become more sexually active. Why? The fear of pregnancy has been removed. There's the so maybe you're afraid of getting pregnant, so you use contraception. Some of the hormonal contraceptives get rid of your sex drive. So there's a host of factors that actually affect female sexuality. Then the woman who's now not afraid to have sex is around 45, because now she cannot get pregnant, then her estrogen goes down. So then she cannot get lubricated, she's feeling pain. So the interest is there, but then the pain comes in. Then your body decides we're not doing this. So, and that's why I said, back to the basics. If we get the basics wrong, everything else, it's a cascade, because you're trying to empower this woman to be able to express themselves better, but they're having pain, okay? And they don't know why. So therapy is one of them, because one of the ways to treat that, because most of the reasons for sexual dysfunction are actually psychological. However, it may be a hormonal issue. So there are, so for people who have low hormone levels, you may be given a cream, an estrogen cream or a pill or a ring to insert within your vagina that then helps with lubrication and everything. There is, for the people who have pain and your hormones are okay, then you can use the normal personal lubricants. There are changes that happen either in the different parts of your menstrual cycle or during pregnancy. Sorry.
It's good.
Or during breastfeeding, or again, because of any other medication you may be taking other than contraceptives. So sometimes what you need is a very candid conversation with your doctor. Because what happens with women is they'll come and tell you, I'm feeling itchy or pain down there, but they don't say it's during sex. So you think there's an infection. So sometimes the infection is the problem, but many times there's a hidden sexual problem that will never be voiced. So I don't know that the drug I gave you is interfering with your interest in sex or your performance of sex, because if I knew, then I would be able to remove that drug and then maybe we'd have hope. So there's a confluence of factors. So I would say the best starting point is to be able to find a healthcare worker who you can have a candid conversation, be able to go through the whole possible list of causes and then address them. Then the other thing is this, therapy. Like when I was studying clinical psychology, we did a whole unit on sexual disorders. However, how many of us have the courage to practice as sex therapists? So we'll deal with everything else, but we'll not deal with sex.
Okay.
So you may actually go through therapy and you're dealing with all your other issues, but we've not actually addressed the issue of sex. So there are very few sex therapists, but they're there.
Okay.
And you can actually try that and it may actually help.
All right.
And it's also, okay, for other reasons, sometimes it's normal to not have interest in sex. So if you're not having sex, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beth, I will go back to you in terms of the input from Florence. Are you in a space where you feel you could carry that information as shared right now? And if you want, you can have another conversation with Florence after the session. But for now, are we good? Okay. Florence, I'll just comment on the things that you have said that have struck me in terms of the statistics in sexual dysfunction and disorder. There's one that you mentioned that starts with female sexual arousal. Do men experience the same?
Yes, they do.
Okay. I was
That's-
about to
so
start
for
catching
them,
feelings.
it's-
Why are we the only ones? Because all our problems start with men, menstruation, menopause. I'm like, surely we can't just be the ones suffering. I'm joking though,
No,
but
that,
yes.
for them, it's called erectile
Erectile dysfunction.
dysfunction.
Okay. But yes, the statistics around 40% vis-a-vis 3%, that's a very big range. But thank you so much for responding to Beth. Now, Nafula, you came deep in the middle of class, so I'll give you a question, and then we'll go back to Carol, who was going to speak about the gaps and the nuances between regulation and safety for commercial sex workers. But in just preparing for today's session, I came across a definition of regulation that says this is the network of formal and informal rules that govern individuals or groups. It also talks about the system of laws, regulatory measures, course of action, and funding priorities when we're looking at regulation. And as Cara gives us a response, I'm curious to know, especially in the work that you do, and you've talked about sharing your experiences as a woman, and that's where you draw your passion from. When I read that statement, personally, I'm just like, a K clause, a man must have written this. Why can't I, what is changing right now? Because I'm also very curious of solutions. The conversation cannot always be that the regulations are wrong, they're not working. So when we look at our infrastructure as a country, when we look at the Constitution, when we look at the Sexual Harassment Act, when we look at the National Adolescent Sexual Reproductive Health Policy that's being rolled out in school right now, I'm seeing good solutions, but why are we still struggling? So I think as Carol gives her response, those are some of the things I am curious to know when we discuss regulation in the context of all those things, including funding priorities. Where's the budget conversation for sexual reproductive health services? Yeah.
Okay. So let me begin by saying that today.
I don't know if we can all hear Carol or we need to swap the mic. Okay.
Okay. The mic is very stigmatizing. So today, Carol is empowered. Carol has the information, and she has the power to negotiate what happens and what doesn't happen. And if in a scenario that Carol is violated, can walk into any police station and report with concrete arguments against the police officer, depending on the officer in charge at the OB. That is how we operate. It depends the officer that you get there, how you're going to report it. Majority of the sex workers do not report sex violations, and the biggest barrier to lack of reporting of sex violation is that we do not have a supportive legal environment and lack of policies to support that even a sex worker can be raped and can be sexually exploited. That is the biggest barrier that we have. We still live in eras where people think and they still have the notion that you being a woman, you are supposed to be submissive to whatever a man says. And when it comes to our industry as a sex worker, so when I am violated and I want to speak about it, everybody will come back to me. So you are the cause. Why did you make that man do that? So you are to be blamed for what is happening. It leaves sex workers with no bargaining powers. Where the society should play a big role is ensuring that we align the policies with the Constitution to create a supportive legal environment for the sex workers, so that if anybody comes and violates you, you have the power and the right to report to someone who will also understand this is what is happening to you.
But you've said Caro today is empowered, right?
Sure.
And all of us in this room have different levels of privileges due to that sense of empowerment. But then we are not also just looking at Caro who's empowered today. We are looking at a young Caro, like you rightfully said, getting into the industry right now. You've talked about specific law enforcement or even police stations where you know you will go and report and action will be taken. It's not necessarily the case in all police stations. Sometimes it comes down to who you find at the gender desk, right?
Exactly.
But it can't be, this safety and safeguarding mechanisms cannot be selective because of a relationship you've established or because the OCS in that station is more understanding or you found a lawyer who's willing to take your case pro bono and they're going to push this agenda. I feel like there's still this whole nuancing around sex work, despite it being the oldest profession, honestly. Why are we in this millennial age still struggling with protecting everybody within that space? And it's not a question directed to you. This is just my thoughts and my rambling. But thank you so much for giving us that perspective. It's something that still needs to be addressed. The safety mechanisms cannot just be to the advantage of a few. It has to cut across the board.
Exactly. And also to make it like, we also need to understand that how the society thinks and how it works to define people's choices and bodies is because we are governed by the religion, the policies, and individuals' interests.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into Mwikali's conversation where we're looking at dignity in sex and who holds the power. Because in as much as we are having a conversation around sexuality for mothers and women, sometimes that policing is internal, where you have your own doubts in terms of what authority or what capacity do I actually have, or what agency do I have to make decisions around my own sexuality. And I know we were talking about dignity in sex and in terms of who authorizes or who gives you permission or who allows for you to experience sex. I like what you said around consensual, what was the word you used? Consensual fornication. Like you're not hiding the fact that I am a sexual being who loves to have sex, but you want to have sex in a safe space in the way that you want, with the person that you want to. So in pussy power and the movement that you're using, especially in the communities you work with, what's the conversation around dignity in sex, the agency to make decisions, and what are some of the biggest hurdles you're facing given the legal structures around sex? You're also dealing with young girls who are below 18, so consent at that point is in the hands of somebody else. Because when we speak about sex, there's the legal edge to have sex, but then there's the personal consent that you have as a person when you choose to have sex, because not everybody waits to be legally 18 to start having sex. So what are some of the things that make your work a bit harder?
So I'll come back to the policy, and I'll try and merge the intersectionality among us, the constituency we exist as women. One, in 2020, the Kenyan government signed Geneva Consensus Declaration. Geneva Consensus Declaration, it affects our right to access sexual and reproductive health and rights, especially accessing safe abortion. It means if today you get raped, you can't access that. What, according to the law, you're supposed to access the service. You see, the criminalization that goes around our sex, sexuality, and pleasure. And when I talk about safe abortion, it means an abortion that you can walk to the hospital and procure it safely without dying. Because in reality, we have had cases of women dying because of unsafe abortion. But you see, this was a trade-off of women, Kenyan women, with another government that was being led by the US government at that point. So you realize when the COVID was so high, the government was doing things that were now coming to do respectability politics towards our body and not giving women the choice. Coming to another bill that I know also the LGBTQ community and sexual reproductive health community we are pushing so much is the East Africa Community Sexual Reproductive Health and Birth Rights. Where, you see, the law is progressive. We love 2010 Constitution, including Mwikali, but there are articles, even personally, I'm like, no. When you tell me to trade off, let's say access to safe abortion and live LGBTQ rights, which also you're denying a constituency also having their sexual rights and pleasure and also protection, there's a problem. And that's why it's important when you're having these questions around sex, sexuality, and pleasure, we be cognizant that it's not only heterosexual relationship that you're talking about. It's not only a constituency or group you only think it's only for, let's say, women like in Madare, like Rachel Mwekali, or women in Kilelejwa, but understanding that these are things that has been there in colonial period, that most of the government, when they are negotiating with other governments, the women of those countries, especially in global north, enjoying those rights, but us, we are not enjoying. And that's why it's very important when you ask me, how do we deal with it? One, the way I said, I'm a privileged Mwekali who can come to this panel and speak. But those years, the way you're asking, I couldn't. Karen, you know me from long time ago, yeah? I couldn't be in those positions. I'll say this is the reality, but sex, sexuality, and pleasure is what affects all of us. Whether you are a CEO or not a CEO, and that's why you will see the politician, when you ask me why use the pussy power word, one is reclaiming our power. Why do you want to use my biology to make me feel shameful? So we all have pussies, and we love our pussies. Creating that intimate relationship with ourselves. And I love the poem that was being said here. Most of the time, especially you being a mother, and I love the theme and mothering or the woman, before you get pregnant, for those who have kids, you can be in this space you want to enjoy and explore. But when we give birth, there's a way even our body sometimes change. True or false? And that's when you're told, oh, you don't look good because of this and this. Like some of us also are using hormones, contraceptive. Mwekali, you didn't have a belly, now you have a belly. I'm like, okay, fine, it's mine. Unless I'm not comfortable with it, I'll deal with it. But we need to remove this normalization that it has to be done to impress the guys. It has to be done to impress the community. And that comes to the question of what you're saying, because it came to my mind. The women at 50 or at 40, my own understanding working with different diverse communities as Coalition for Grassroots Human Rights Defender, and even among the Pussy Power team, is that the way society has been designed, and the way, like this is now my understanding, most will become mothers when you're a teenager. You don't know even what sex means, true or false, or maybe between your 20s. Then you start educating that child, whether you're a CEO or not a CEO community woman. It's a struggle. The men, they're exploring outside there with any person they want, any way, they're exploring. But by the time your kids finish education, you're already 40. That's when you realize, by the way, Siku enjoy. I need to go back. You see? So you find your whole life, your youthful life, even building careers, you have never had this opportunity of having a meaningful, consensual sex. Yeah. And that's why it's very important, even this conversation we are having, it's to remove this shaming of women, even saying, me, I didn't like that person, so I prefer maybe going to this person. Why are we excusing when guys can say, me, but I didn't like that chick, and I moved to this one, and we say, it's okay? Or why are we normalizing these ideas that it's only a man that can introduce sex position, not a woman, in bedroom affairs? Yeah. Why are we normalizing these ideas that it's okay for boy child to talk about sex and not girl child to talk about their sex and sexuality and say no? Like, and that's why it comes to what you're asking, also working with adolescent girls. For me, as Rachel Mwekali, I'm not a believer of abstinence, to be honest. I'm not. Looking on where I started having sex, it was not consensual, yes. When I'm understanding now, it was defilement, it was rape, and all manner of intersectionality of oppression. But I'm a believer, let's give information to the children. Let them understand. Stop telling them the role of the ovaries is to do this, the role of uterus is to do this, but not telling them into practicality, sex is good, but at the same time it's bad, but also have the information that it's only good when you feel this and this, or when you reach to a consensual end. Because we forget sometimes even these kids are also having sex amongst themselves. But who holds the power? Yeah, it's the boy, not the girl. So for me, it's something as women from our own diversity, we need to normalize this discussion. We need to normalize to policy. And like when we ask the question about funding, in my other heart, I sit in other spaces like Amnesty Board and the Danish Embassy Board. And being in feminist spaces and also being in spaces that I'm able to see funders, we need to move this idea of sexuality and sex to the box and only focus, because I think also funders, there's a problem. In their own countries, they are quick saying, let's put money in sex, sexuality, or SHR projects. But when it comes to women issues, based on also AWID report of where is the money for women rights organization, the least money even in Kenya we get for women rights organizations, was it 0.03%? Was it 3 or 2? I'm not sure, you can confirm. But you find more money is being put on corruption, governance, leadership, those things, yeah? You see, the things that, the women issues have been reduced even by funders to such a way it's an issue. And that's why also I think we need to ask funders accountability.
Okay.
For example, if you're telling me to work on access to safe abortion, are you investing also money on me? Because I feel it's a priority, it's an issue, it's affecting us. But also I'm looking in terms of even ourselves as collective. Also I believe in local funding. The same way we give our pastors money, sadaka, 10%. Are we in a position also to fund our local initiative? Are we in a position to say, sex, sexuality, it's a big issue. Are we in a position to support women? Let's say if I tell you today, I'm married, I'm pregnant, I don't want a child, I want to abort it. Are we in a position to save each other, or we are saying no? And then you ended up dying in a quack, and then we're like, oh my God, I wish you could have helped. So this is a thing also we need to push funders to invest more. Because if we were able to talk about this, we were able to prevent unsafe abortion, we were able to prevent unwanted pregnancy and remove this idea sex is for procreation.
Mikali, allow me to ask a question, and this is not just to you, but to everyone in the room. So at any point you feel you have a response to this, please just let us know and we can take a response also from the audience. Nafula, you're going to take the mic next because I know I'd posed a question earlier. But as we wrap up our session right now, there are a couple of things that have been raised in our conversation right now. There's a conversation around body politics that is very big. And I always link that back to who holds the power, who has agency to make the right decision over somebody else's body and what they do with it, where we have issues around safe and unsafe abortion, access to sexual reproductive health materials. There's a question we had asked Florence earlier around what forms our sexuality. And when I look at it from a regulations perspective, the laws are written from, there's always a moral clause behind it, yeah? Where we are not necessarily just being told the do's and the don'ts, we're also being given very harsh consequences when you cross the line. But I'm like, what is this line we're crossing? Who decides what is this line? How do I take ownership of my own pleasure? Like, I'll give an example of, and I'd like to believe most of us in this room would not go like, but have you been in spaces where, for example, you're talking about a sexual toy, or like the way Val mentioned lube, and everyone looks at you like you're the Antichrist, like, wow, did you just say that out loud, you know? And when I look at the laws that are in place to safeguard all of us, it is coming from a point of, this is wrong, this is bad. You'll grow 10 heads if you masturbate. If you have more than one sexual partner, you're inevitably getting AIDS. Who raised you because you decided, I don't know, whatever choice you make with regarding your sexuality, the counteractive law is always from the negative. We're not talking about the positive sides of why these safeguarding mechanisms are there to keep us safe. So personally, I find it very off-putting. You cannot start a conversation by telling me, and everyone who knows me knows on a personal level, I struggle with authority because of how it comes. It's always, don't do this, don't do this. I'm like, but where's the space to have an open conversation and listen to the other side of the story? So as we wrap up this session, those are some of the things I'm posing to the audience as Nafula gives us a final word on regulation and what that means.
It's difficult to know where to plug in amidst everything that has been said. But I think just to sum it up, first of all, I think it's important for us to, there's something that you've said that I found really powerful, which was around morality. Morality clauses being behind policies and laws. And for me, this ties back to patriarchy. We cannot speak about what we're talking about without constantly going back to patriarchy and what it is. I think, unfortunately, society, we've gotten to a point where we've reduced the conversation of around patriarchy to individual sexist acts. So people never see the big picture of what patriarchy is. So they don't see it as a system. So the conversation becomes like we are making the conversation on feminism and women and where we are becomes around what incremental gains we are making. So it becomes, you shouldn't be complaining because now you can wear what you want. Now, my dress, my choice passed, and, there's an actual, like, little law that was added, and women can walk in town with, or, like, there's all these little things that are brought up to tell women to keep quiet. Because at the end of the day, there's all these tiny, tiny steps that you're making. You should be applauding and celebrating. But I think when you look at patriarchy as a system, then we are able to see how bad things still are and how much more work there is to do, even as we celebrate the little gains, yeah? So for me, I think first of all is to encourage us to really look at patriarchy as what it is and call it out for what it is. It is a system, and the reason why a woman in Dadaab or a woman living in Kibra today, a Muslim woman or a woman living in the US or Sweden with all the privileges in the world, we can all sit down and have something to talk about. Because our experiences, as different as they are, there's still something that connects. Like, you can still sit there and say, you know what, I have felt shamed, or I felt violated. And it's because at the end of the day, this system has crept into like every different space. And it's so insidious that it has crept into our bedrooms. And for me, that is the craziest thing. And so even when we speak about internalization, and me being in my own room and not feeling like I can express myself a certain way to my sexual partner, it's because the same system that is operating, in parliament, that is creating laws in parliament, has crept into our bedrooms and into our bodies and into our minds. And I think challenging it only begins by acknowledging that power, like looking at power within those different levels. So looking at it, first of all, as an individual, as a woman, when you think about power, within the context of your home, in our bedrooms, in our workplaces, even by ourselves, how has power, how have we translated that patriarchal power, and how has it affected us and our individual decisions, yeah? So beginning to create a difference means beginning to challenge that power at an individual level. And doing that is in different ways. It is in language, yeah? So Stella Nyanzi is considered vulgar because of the language she uses, because she uses the words like fuck. And because, words that we say are vulgar, and therefore she's seen as a vulgar woman, a bad woman. And in many ways, that is her way of using language to reclaim power, yeah? And pussy power as well, as Rachel mentioned. The reason why it irks people so much is because they will put this conversation around morality around it. And morality clauses are there to sustain the hierarchy, to sustain status quo. And so as long as we are not able to step out and look at how we express ourselves, even in the way that we dress, and I think that's the other thing, for me, expression is really just about authenticity. It's about who am I, yeah? And I think that's the most important thing, is we don't box women, because women, in many ways, I feel like women contribute to the maintenance of patriarchal structures. We play as much of a role and as men do. In some spaces, we play as much of a role as men do. When we call out women for being sluts, for dressing in a particular way, we are contributing to that narrative. And I know that it is informed by many things because we all grew up within that patriarchal system. But at the end of the day, question yourself. When you're calling that woman a slut, or you're calling that woman too conservative for covering up too much of her body, have you thought about her individual choice? At the center of all the conversations around even bodily autonomy and sexual expression is choice. Is that choice informed? One. And then two, is it a choice that, am Is it a choice that I am making with full information? And then is it a choice that I am making personally, as Nafula, as Rachel, as women in this space, to express ourselves sexually in the way that we're expressing ourselves, to be liberal, to be conservative? I think the most important thing there, at the core of everything, at the core of our conversations around bodily autonomy, is choice, right? And then stepping out of the individual level and taking power from an individual perspective is also now at community level. So how do we do that? I'm a strong believer in movements, which is why I'm such a big fan of Pussy Power. I think social movements are the key to toppling the power as we see it today. Because social movements are not engineered and they are not based on particular funding coming in from a particular institution. You know, if we wake up today and we say we want to do a protest, NGO, and I'll use this concept, NGOization. NGOization is when we can't go for the protest because we don't have t-shirts, because we don't have what, because we need to call a press conference. Power movements are, I'll give you an example of women in Uganda who were fighting. This was like a climate justice issue and land was being taken away. All they did was step out, like these were really old women, and there's a conversation around how there's a curse in that particular tribe in Uganda where men are not supposed to see the nakedness of their women. I think it applies in many of our tribes. But these women stepped out, stripped their clothes in front of the minister of lands that was there, and someone from the army. These men started crying. They were reduced to tears because they were so afraid. Yeah? And for me, that is the power of a woman's body as well. Using that and understanding also, like from a cultural perspective, what does it mean to be woman? And using that even in our protest. And so I think movement building and being able to move away from the concept of NGOization or believing that you need to register an organization in order to have voice, we need to start moving away from that and recognize that there is space for NGOs, but then there's also space for movements. I am just wrapping up, I promise. It's just that I was trying to bulk everything in that one thing. So yeah, so I think that's the second thing, is how can we tap into movements? How can we tap into campaigning? So platforms, digital platforms. I personally have used online petitions twice. One, to get 3 corporates to remove sexist advertising, including Safaricom. I was 23 at the time. And then secondly, thank you. And the second time was when a rugby player had sexually assaulted. Yeah, and it was a petition to begin to look at how rugby teams can have policies to address sexual harassment and sexual violence. What I'm trying to say is that we have the power in our hands. We have the tools. We need the capacity. And if we can come together and begin to look at how do we build solidarity around getting capacity into the hands of each and every woman in this space, each and every woman out there, then we will begin to understand that the power to topple these patriarchal structures doesn't necessarily lie in institutionalization, right? So that is what we can do as, as individuals at community level. And then lastly, of course, it's just the role that organizations play because they have the power, because they have the money, and because they have the resources, and the opportunity to be in the spaces is, in a nutshell, just so I don't have to delve into it, practice feminist leadership. It's as simple as that. Incorporate and practice feminist leadership.
Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry for the overtime.
Because I still value my friendships. We're going to give... Thank you so much, Nafula.
So this is more of a statement, and I guess I can also see the context of the question, right? And it's around abstinence. So abstinence is also an option, right? When it comes to sexual choice and having bodily autonomy. So we need to educate people about sex, but there's also the issue of pressurized sex, like sex under duress, peer pressure, and things like that. And the person is saying that you can abstain and you can be sexually empowered, but still abstain from sex. But it doesn't seem to be the narrative that is constantly, I think there's an assumption that sexual empowerment equals having sex.
Yes.
So maybe it would be good to hear from our panelists how this then comes to, how we can support that kind of thinking. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Janice. And for that question. So we'll start, actually, you'll be the first person to speak on it as we come down this way.
Wait, while she's there, while she's talking about, since she has the mic, there's also a sort of question here. Do I ask or you ask?
Yeah, it's related to what Janice has just said. I think it's the doctor that said we are born with, I don't know, something about sexual desires and sexual disorder and not wanting sex being a disorder or something like that. I don't know whether that's medical or clinical, but I feel that that is for me, I'm finding it hard to reconcile with that because there are people who are asexual. So they have no desire at all. And maybe someone is sitting in the room thinking, oh shit, fuck me. I have a disorder. And I don't think that that is the narrative that I want to embrace. Because, there are people who identify as asexual. So linked to that.
So,
Thank you. So my last statement when I was answering was it's okay to not want to have sex. You don't have to. But biologically, the way we are built as sexual beings. That's why you have the XY chromosomes, etc., and a whole reproductive system. So the system is wired like that, but sometimes for some people, it just doesn't work like that. And you don't have to now push the person to become sexual. You don't have to. However, the problem is when you want to, but, there's no cooperation from the body. So then it becomes a disorder because then it's interfering with your own peace of mind or your relationships. So regarding abstinence as a choice. So when I was saying we need to go back to basics, this is how I'll close. What I mean is this: let's give adequate and correct information as early as possible in a safe environment so that everybody gets to make an informed choice. And that choice may be abstinence. I'm an example of that. With all the empowerment I have, I was a virgin on my wedding day, and it was by choice. Okay, this is after all the education, all the exposure, everything. And I felt for me, based on a whole host of factors, but also because of the impact of sex. Because you see, there's a positive and there's a negative. And as you said correctly, we come with the negative first. So we tell people don't, but we don't tell them what you do. So I actually had to have a sitting with myself, reconcile what I have learned from different corners, and then decide what is best for Florence. Okay, this is what I'm gonna do. And I felt this is the safest and the best option for me. And I actually push for that. So as we go whichever direction, I'm a big advocate for abstinence, but not forced. You need to make the choice for yourself with the correct information. Yes, and that information should not come through experience. Then we are failing. And the question I would ask myself is, even as we're pushing for gendered, what's that thing in finance? I forget. We're pushing
gender responsive budgeting.
Gender responsive budgeting, as we're pushing for feminist leadership, as we're pushing for all those things. The question is, at a personal level, what can you do? When you look at your daughter, when you look at your sister, when you look at your friend, what can you do? When you look at yourself, what can you do? And that's my push for all of us. Let's disseminate so that the people coming behind us do not have the same narrative that we do.
All right. Thank you so much, Florence.
Yeah, I mean, how do you even add to that? For me, at the core of everything, I think, is choice. That's it. For me, I mean, I think as women, especially when you speak to women in spaces and you have everyone coming with, I don't believe I'm not a feminist, I'm an equalist. And then there's, I'm a feminist, but not this kind of feminist, I'm a humanist. So we have all these things, we get lost in language, in nuance. Language is powerful and it is important. So I'm not saying that I am in no way diminishing the value and the importance of language and titles and, pronouns, for example. There is power in that. But always remember that at the core of conversations around heteronormativity, around cisgenders, everything is, what does that mean for you? What does that mean for us as women? And when you look at yourself authentically, what does choice mean? And if choice means abstinence, and that is your expression, then by all means embrace it. If it is informed, if it is not coerced, if it is your choice, by the way, you know what? Go for it. If it is not, if it is sexual expression in its fullest form, embrace it. By the end of the day, at the core is choice. And have you chosen as a person? Yeah.
Thank you, Nafula.
Sorry. So, if you keep on judging people, you'll never love them and you'll never understand them. It's the right time for people to start believing in themselves, making the choices about your bodies, how you want to feel, and how you want to express yourself, and the pleasure for you to be able to achieve the sexual pleasure that you wish to have.
Thank you so much, Carol.
Nice. I think I was the person who said mambo ya abstinence. One, like the way I said, I respect choice. But the reason why sometimes I feel we have to be very careful with the word abstinence, it's because it has been bombarded. You remember when you're growing up, you used, for my people in my generation, to me chill, kwa TV. So you remember that? It was, I don't know which organization was funding it.
It was a trust condom
ad. Before trust, there was a campaign. Yeah. So the reason why I'm saying this, because we have seen abstinence not working. And we have seen abstinence also criminalizing women also who are adults to make their decision. And that's the point of, if you choose to chill, it's fine. If you're asexual, it's okay. But also we have to be very careful what Nafula is saying of the language. The language that we put it there in front to ensure like it criminalizes women. Like you can still feel in the room, be a bit, tunataka kuongea lakini tujiachilie. Na ambayo ametukazia time. Na ndio liberation, pole na kwa kiusa. Because everything, for me, like wrapping up, everything, when you talk about liberation, when you talk about revolution, it has to start from bedroom. It doesn't matter who you sleep with, who you have fun with, but to a point of, because all of us here, we are one or another bit privileged. We can talk, but when it comes to sex politics and body politics, wengine wetu tunagopanga ino na to bring down. Apart from people like kama mimi nimedeclare, itaniangusha. I can choose to whoever I want to sleep with. Kama hiyo ndo kadi watu taleta oppressor, siruki ni yangu. Nanipata? Because we have to be very careful. The patriarch, it works for them. And that's why I'm very cognizant of what Nafula was saying. We need to build movements where we are inclusive and tolerance to each other. For those who have chosen to be even polyamorous, for those who have chosen to abstain, for those who have chosen to be either wife, mother, not to have kids, we need to be tolerant to a point that we respect their choice and agency. And that comes to what you are asking. What's our role? Please, please. All the fights we enjoy in this country is because of feminists in this country. Let's support women who are frontliners in doing the real work, exposing themselves to threats, exposing themselves to any form of violence in order for us to be free. And when I mean any form of violence, is the state violence. It's the state violence where they know if now you come in public fighting, they're going to use your sexuality to fight you. We have seen women in this country, including Akina Matakarua, being bring down because of their sexuality. When they say you have slept with you as if sleeping is bad. All of us enjoy meaningful consensual sex. So that's very important as we are moving forward in power decision, either in corporate, either in private sector. Let's acknowledge and let's support movement. Beyond just saying feminist leadership. Because I think also, and I know here there are funders, this is my critique also to funders. Give money to the people who do the real work. I've seen a lot of homophobic organizations nowadays, they are feminists of the feminists. because of donor money. So you have seen them. And the funders are giving them money, which makes me annoyed. Give the people who are doing the real work support. You don't have to come to the street. If you know someone is going on the street, support those initiatives. Support those initiatives that it's about our freedom, because someone is sacrificing their own, even personal life to push the agenda. But all in all, let's liberate ourselves from that slavery and keep doing whatever we are doing. Thank you, UnMothering, the woman, for creating this conversation. It brings the linkages even for, you can see me, I'm from Mathare, kuna hii side ingine ya Uruaiwe, but tunaelewana. Ndio? Tunaelewana. So hakuna mambo ati sijui tuko divided. We are not divided. We are all women, whether you're in Global South or Global North. Let's maintain that authentic, transformative solidarity that we are having. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mikali. A lot has been said, and I'm going to try and capture, in summary, that the things that have come up. In terms of information is power, and the right information, not just any loose information. The right information is very powerful. Recognizing the power you hold within you as a human being, regardless of how you identify. In the example you've given for the women in Uganda, that was a very key reminder of the power you hold as a person just by existing as who you are. The thing about not judging a book by its cover, being accepting, opens you up to knowledge, like Kara's mentioned. You have to remove yourself from this bubble that you live in. You have to be open to learning from other people as well. And I really applaud Mikali in terms of her willingness to be brave to start the conversations that we are scared of having. I really like that you've reclaimed the word pussy, because at some point, even me internally, sometimes I still cringe. And I'm like, but it's a part of my body. And why am I feeling shame about it? Why should I let somebody else use this one thing that is the source of so much pleasure, cause me so much shame, you know? And there's something I read in trying to prepare for today's conversation that I'm still trying to internalize, but I think it's important to mention. Earlier on, when speaking to Karen, Mikali, and Florence, I was telling them I hate the word vulnerability. In certain spaces, it denotes strength because you've allowed people to see the real you, who you are, you've broken down walls. But in this conversation, I feel like we are all at risk. And when you call me a vulnerable person, you're reminding me that I have no power. I have nothing, I have no solution, that I can't do anything about it. So it's almost disempowering sometimes when we use the word vulnerable persons. So I'm going to change that. But the statement was that the overarching concept of vulnerable populations is founded by international mechanisms that raises questions about identity and action. But the part that struck me is when it says, it is not membership in a population that shapes vulnerability. And for me, it's not who we are that makes us vulnerable, but rather the engagement in certain acts or behaviors that put us at risk or that put us in vulnerable situations. So we are not the problem. When we say we are an at-risk population, we are not at risk because we are human or we are present or we present ourselves in a certain way. We are at risk because the things around us, the environment around us, the circumstances we find ourselves in are not structured to protect us or protect us from the risks we face. So that's my parting shot for now. Wamboi, thank you for the 25 minutes. A round of applause for our panelists who've done a really good job at keeping us engaged.